Hello, my name is Sophie Rain and I'm a PhD student in the Department of English Literature and Creative Writing at Lancaster University. The aim of this session is to get you thinking critically about the theme of morality in Priestley's and Inspector Calls. The session will deal with numerous interpretations of the play in order to demonstrate critical and creative thinking that you may encounter if you were to study English at a higher level. The session will consist of me guiding you through my interpretation of the text, as well as providing opportunities for you to complete activities. These activities will be in your Inspector Calls workbook. If you do not have this to hand, don't worry, you'll be able to complete this with pen and paper. I will give you instructions throughout on when to pause and complete certain tasks. One of the main tasks you'll be asked to complete as we go through is the morality essay grid. This is a structure to help you with your analysis so you can build up to an essay in your own time. This is on page 3 of your workbook. If you don't have the workbook, I would recommend pausing the recording now so that you may copy this down from the screen before continuing. To start off, I'm just going to give a quick definition of what we mean by morality, which is seen as a system of values, or a way of making a distinction between right and wrong. While this may seem simple on the surface, Priestley shows how complex this can be. If you go to Activity 1 in your workbook, you will see some questions. I want you to consider and write a brief answer to the following questions. How do we know what is moral? Do we have a general consensus on morality? And are any of the characters in the play moral? So take some time and write down your ideas now, pause the recording and press play when you're ready to continue. Let's address each of these questions in turn. There are many ways that people can develop morality, for example through learned behaviour such as family influence. It can also come from an innate sense of justice. We can also learn moral issues from the art and the media we consume. It is difficult for us to have a general consensus on morality, as what is moral can change depending on the time period and circumstances. Therefore, we need to consider context when looking at any text. For example, having a child outside of marriage is looked upon very differently in the 21st century compared to how it would have been seen in the late 19th and early 20th century. Morality can also vary from person to person. For the final question, are any of the characters in the play moral? Priestley presents the Burlings as characters who believe themselves to be upstanding citizens. It is only through the inspector that the audience is shown their unscrupulous behaviour. There are some model characters that Priestley hopes the audience will try to emulate: the inspector, Eva, and later in the play, Sheila. Morality is often associated with religious teachings, so I'm going to spend the next few slides viewing the concept of morality from religious, specifically Christian perspectives, in terms of language and symbolism. Religion plays a large part of this play, so it's often referred to as a morality play, which were popular in the 15th and 16th century. These plays were allegorical and had characters who represented abstract thoughts and ideas to teach the audience a moral message. On the slide is an example of one of these plays, which was first printed around 1530 and is referred to as Everyman. Everyman, the main character, represents all humanity, and the story follows him as he learns to shun earthly sins in order for his soul to be saved. The inspector uses religious rhetoric and Christian teachings to establish himself as morally superior to the Burlings. The inspector acts as a spiritual guide for them by attempting to enlighten and educate. We know from the initial stage directions that when the inspector comes in, the lights will turn brighter and harder, which signifies not only his ability to shine a light on the crimes of the Burlings, but also likens him to an angel due to our associations with light. The religious association is shown through his omniscience, and, as like a godlike figure, he seems to know all the sins of the Burlings. In his apocalyptic final speech, while definitely alluding to World War II and the violence and anguish that was yet to come, the language here is religious, indicated by fire and blood, giving allusions to hell. This shows that those who don't adhere to the inspector's moral philosophy can expect an afterlife of damnation. Those who don't obey are punished, again comparing the inspector with the image of a wrathful Old Testament God. The inspector's prophetic final speech is an example of biblical hyperbole, as we see the inspector alluding to religion for dramatic purposes. This use of hyperbole, or exaggeration, is not what we would typically expect of an impartial detective. Here, he behaves more like a hellfire preacher. It is significant that this is his final speech, as the audience are awed by his final words and impressive rhetoric. As you can see on the slide, there are two extracts. one from the inspector's speech and another from Corinthians. Priestley uses biblical references to unity to inspire the audience into action, as well as appealing to their sense of community. This would have been particularly impactful having just come out of World War II. In your workbook, if you turn to Activity 2, you will find these extracts. Complete the first section of your morality essay grid on page 3. Take some time to complete the first section. As well as the religious language used throughout the text, the characters are also symbolic of either sins or virtues, as was seen in the morality plays discussed earlier. Eva represents the 7 virtues, specifically faith, hope, charity, fortitude, and justice. She campaigns for the rights of working class labourers, refuses stolen money even when she is desperate, and continues to be hopeful and determined in the face of adversity. By making Eva the opposite of the Burlings, Priestley shows how morality does not depend upon class or wealth. Like the allegorical characters in the morality plays, these characters all act as symbols to try and show the audience how to behave in a decent way for the betterment of society. On the other hand, we see the Burlings' values in opposition to Eva's, as they represent some of the 7 deadly sins. Mr. Burling is guilty of greed. Sheila, due to envy, has Eva fired from her job. This can also be considered wrath, as she describes herself as being furious. Gerald and Eric are both guilty of lust, and Mrs. Burling is guilty of pride, as she is offended by Eva using her name when she goes to seek help from the committee. Each of these is an allegorical representation of this sin. Whether they choose to accept this and resist this in a temptation will show whether they move towards becoming a more moral person throughout the play. Morality is further explored through the idea of legality and social acceptability. Have a look at Gerald's comments to the inspector during the interrogation, where he states, "After all, we're respectable citizens and not criminals." For Activity 3, write down your answers to these questions. What dramatic technique is being used here? What does this suggest about Gerald's morality? And do you believe that morality and legality are the same thing? So take some time to write down your ideas now, pausing the recording and pressing play when you're ready to continue. The dramatic technique that Gerald uses here is irony, as the audience learn that the Burlings are far from respectable citizens. This suggests that for Gerald, morality is dictated by social etiquette and law rather than a genuine sense of right and wrong. Morality and legality are explored in their relation to each other throughout the play. Continuously, the Burling parents and Gerald fail to understand that the inspector is on a moral mission, and so try to rigorously apply the law to him to show their innocence. Gerald and the Burlings believe that if their acts are not illegal, then they're not accountable. Though the inspector is there as an agent of the law, it's clear his priorities revolve around justice and integrity. Morality is further explored through Now you've answered the questions, fill in the second row on your essay grid using the quotation we've just discussed. If you want to challenge yourself further, then find your own quotation showing the distinction between morality and legality. When you are ready, move on to the next slide. Another lens with which to explore morality is the idea of duty. Now, duty has a dual meaning. Duty can be something which you're expected to do, for example, as part of a job. Another meaning of duty can be something you'll feel morally obligated to do, for example, feeling it's your duty to help others. The inspector's sense of duty comes from a moral perspective. He's not particularly interested in legality. As I've mentioned before, the inspector is only interested in having the Burlings accept responsibility and atone for their actions. The inspector repeatedly uses the word duty and states on one occasion, "It is my duty to ask questions." The inspector, however, is already aware of all the answers, and his investigation doesn't actually lead to an arrest, and is really outside the scope of normal police work. This is different how duty is viewed by some of the other characters, where morality does not factor into it. Mr. Burling states it's his duty to keep labour costs down, so his sense of duty reflects his own greed and desire for profit, making it less noble than that of the inspector. The theme continues with Mrs. Burling. Despite having refused Eva money for herself and her unborn child, Mrs. Burling accepts nobly him for the death. She states, "I did nothing that I'm ashamed of, or that won't bear investigation." Here, once again, the focus is on legal culpability, rather than moral responsibility to the women who seek her committee for help. She goes on to state that they are asked to look carefully at the claims that are made of them. The Burlings, therefore, consider duty to be what their job requires, or what is needed to make their company grow. They fail to see how they have an extended duty to society, and a more moral duty which outweighs their personal agendas. For your final activity, try and find a quotation which links the idea of morality and duty in order to complete your essay grid. Take some time to complete this activity now and move on to the next slide when you're done. I want to just leave you with some concluding thoughts on how the play approaches morality. For Priestley, morality is held at a higher value than social etiquette or legal rules. The audience must learn to resist the deadly sins that lead to immorality. Priestley engages with ideas regarding morals and responsibilities to reveal socialism as a universal good which society needs to embrace. In your workbook for this session, you'll see the following activities that are shown on the screen. It may be helpful for you to use the planning grid you've been working on this session as a structure for these essays. There is also some space for you to add a further point to the grid in order to develop your ideas further. You may want to consider, how does Priestley present the complex nature of morality? Does the failure of the Burlings to intervene or help Eva make them morally responsible for her death? And how does Priestley show the changing morals of the characters? Many thanks for listening to this session. I hope you found it helpful and are starting to think about the many ways that you can approach thematic questions. For further information about studying English literature at Lancaster University, please follow the link on the slide. Thank you. Further titles in the An Inspector Calls workshop series include Morality, Public versus Private, and Interruptions. Many thanks for listening to this session. I hope you found it helpful and are starting to think about the many ways that you can approach thematic questions. For further information about studying English literature at Lancaster University, please follow the link on the slide. Thank you. In your workbook for this session, you'll see the following activities that are shown on the screen. It may be helpful for you to use the planning grid you've been working on this session as a structure for these essays. There is also some space for you to add a further point to the grid in order to develop your ideas further. You may want to consider, how does Priestley present the complex nature of morality? Does the failure of the Burlings to intervene or help Eva make them morally responsible for her death? And how does Priestley show the changing morals of the characters? I want to just leave you with some concluding thoughts on how the play approaches morality. For Priestley, morality is held at a higher value than social etiquette or legal rules. The audience must learn to resist the deadly sins that lead to immorality. Priestley engages with ideas regarding morals and responsibilities to reveal socialism as a universal good which society needs to embrace. Another lens with which to explore morality is the idea of duty. Now, duty has a dual meaning. Duty can be something which you're expected to do, for example, as part of a job. Another meaning of duty can be something you'll feel morally obligated to do, for example, feeling it's your duty to help others. The inspector's sense of duty comes from a moral perspective. He's not particularly interested in legality. As I've mentioned before, the inspector is only interested in having the Burlings accept responsibility and atone for their actions. The inspector repeatedly uses the word duty and states on one occasion, "It is my duty to ask questions." The inspector, however, is already aware of all the answers, and his investigation doesn't actually lead to an arrest, and is really outside the scope of normal police work. This is different how duty is viewed by some of the other characters, where morality does not factor into it. Mr. Burling states it's his duty to keep labour costs down, so his sense of duty reflects his own greed and desire for profit, making it less noble than that of the inspector. The theme continues with Mrs. Burling. Despite having refused Eva money for herself and her unborn child, Mrs. Burling accepts no blame for the death. She states, "I did nothing that I'm ashamed of or that won't bear investigation." Here, once again, the focus is on legal culpability rather than moral responsibility to the women who seek her committee for help. She goes on to state that they are asked to look carefully at the claims that are made of them. The Burlings, therefore, consider duty to be what their job requires, or what is needed to make their company grow. They fail to see how they have an extended duty to society and a more moral duty which outweighs their personal agendas. For your final activity, try and find a quotation which links the idea of morality and duty in order to complete your essay grid. Take some time to complete this activity now and move on to the next slide when you're done. Now you've answered the questions, fill in the second row on your essay grid using the quotation we've just discussed. If you want to challenge yourself further, Then find your own quotation showing the distinction between morality and legality. When you are ready, move on to the next slide. The idea of legality and social acceptability. Have a look at Gerald's comments to the inspector during the interrogation, where he states, "After all, we're respectable citizens and not criminals." For activity 3, write down your answers to these questions. What dramatic technique is being used here? What does this suggest about Gerald's morality? Do you believe that morality and legality are the same thing? So take some time to write down your ideas now, pausing the recording and pressing play when you're ready to continue. The dramatic technique that Gerald uses here is irony, as the audience learn that the Burlings are far from respectable citizens. This suggests that for Gerald, morality is dictated by social etiquette and law rather than a genuine sense of right and wrong. Morality and legality are explored in their relation to each other throughout the play. Continuously, the Burling parents and Gerald fail to understand that the inspector is on a moral mission, and so try to rigorously apply the law to him to show their innocence. Gerald and the Burlings believe that if their acts are not illegal, then they're not accountable. Though the inspector is there as an agent of the law, it's clear his priorities revolve around justice and integrity. As well as the religious language used throughout the text, the characters are also symbolic of either sins or virtues, as was seen in the morality plays discussed earlier. Eva represents the 7 virtues, specifically faith, hope, charity, fortitude, and justice. She campaigns for the rights of working class labourers, refuses stolen money even when she is desperate, and continues to be hopeful and determined in the face of adversity. By making Eva the opposite of the Burlings, Priestley shows how morality does not depend upon class or wealth. Like the allegorical characters in the morality plays, these characters all act as symbols to try and show the audience how to behave in a decent way for the betterment of society. On the other hand, we see the Burlings' values in opposition to Eva's, as they represent some of the 7 deadly sins. Mr. Burling is guilty of greed. Sheila, due to envy, has Eva fired from her job. This can also be considered wrath, as she describes herself as being furious. Gerald and Eric are both guilty of lust, and Mrs. Burling is guilty of pride, as she is offended by Eva using her name when she goes to seek help from the committee. Each of these is an allegorical representation of this sin. Whether they choose to accept this and resist this inner temptation will show whether they move towards becoming a more moral person throughout the play. The inspector's prophetic final speech is an example of biblical hyperbole, as we see the inspector alluding to religion for dramatic purposes. This use of hyperbole, or exaggeration, is not what we would typically expect of an impartial detective. Here, he behaves more like a hellfire preacher. It is significant that this is his final speech, as the audience are awed by his final words and impressive rhetoric. As you can see on the slide, there are 2 extracts, one from the inspector's speech and another from Corinthians. Priestley uses biblical references to unity to inspire the audience into action, as well as appealing to their sense of community. This would have been particularly impactful, having just come out of World War II. In your workbook, if you turn to Activity 2, you will find these extracts. Complete the first section of your morality essay grid on page 3. Take some time to complete the first section. He uses religious rhetoric and Christian teachings to establish himself as morally superior to the Burlings. The inspector acts as a spiritual guide for them by attempting to enlighten and educate. We know from the initial stage directions that when the inspector comes in, the lights will turn brighter and harder, which signifies not only his ability to shine a light on the crimes of the Burlings, but also likens him to an angel due to our associations with light. The religious association is shown through his omniscience, and, as like a godlike figure, he seems to know all the sins of the Burlings. In his apocalyptic final speech, while definitely alluding to World War II and the violence and anguish that was yet to come, the language here is religious, indicated by fire and blood, giving allusions to hell. This shows that those who don't adhere to the inspector's moral philosophy can expect an afterlife of damnation. Those who don't obey are punished, again comparing the inspector with the image of a wrathful Old Testament God. Often associated with religious teachings, so I'm going to spend the next few slides viewing the concept of morality from religious, specifically Christian perspectives, in terms of language and symbolism. Religion plays a large part of this play, so it's often referred to as a morality play, which were popular in the 15th and 16th century. These plays were allegorical and had characters who represented abstract thoughts and ideas, to teach the audience a moral message. On the slide is an example of one of these plays, which was first printed around 1530 and is referred to as Everyman. Everyman, the main character, represents all humanity, and the story follows him as he learns to shun earthly sins in order for his soul to be saved. To start off, I'm just going to give a quick definition of what we mean by morality, which is seen as a system of values, or a way of making a distinction between right and wrong. While this may seem simple on the surface, Priestley shows how complex this can be. If you go to Activity 1 in your workbook, you will see some questions. I want you to consider and write a brief answer to the following questions. How do we know what is moral? Do we have a general consensus on morality? And are any of the characters in the play moral? So take some time and write down your ideas now, pause the recording and press play when you're ready to continue. Let's address each of these questions in turn. There are many ways that people can develop morality, for example through learned behaviour such as family influence. It can also come from an innate sense of justice. We can also learn moral issues from the art and the media we consume. It's difficult for us to have a general consensus on morality, as what is moral can change depending on the time period and circumstances. Therefore, we need to consider context when looking at any text. For example, having a child outside of marriage is looked upon very differently in the 21st century compared to how it would have been seen in the late 19th and early 20th century. Morality can also vary from person to person. For the final question, are any of the characters in the play moral? Priestley presents the Burlings as characters who believe themselves to be upstanding citizens. It is only through the inspector that the audience is shown their unscrupulous behaviour. There are some model characters that Priestley hopes the audience will try to emulate: the inspector, Eva, and later in the play, Sheila. One of the main tasks you'll be asked to complete as we go through is the morality essay grid. This is a structure to help you with your analysis so you can build up to an essay in your own time. This is on page 3 of your workbook. If you don't have the workbook, I would recommend pausing the recording now so that you may copy this down from the screen before continuing. Hello, my name is Sophie Rain and I'm a PhD student in the Department of English Literature and Creative Writing at Lancaster University. The aim of this session is to get you thinking critically about the theme of morality in Priestley's An Inspector Calls. The session will deal with numerous interpretations of the play in order to demonstrate critical and creative thinking that you may encounter if you were to study English at a higher level. The session will consist of me guiding you through my interpretation of the text, as well as providing opportunities for you to complete activities. These activities will be in your An Inspector Calls workbook. If you do not have this to hand, don't worry, you'll be able to complete this with pen and paper. I will give you instructions throughout on when to pause and complete certain tasks.